Welcome, my friends. On March 17th, 2021, after 2 months of straight attempts, 170 hours, and over 19 billion potential GP lost, I've managed one of my greatest achievements in RuneScape, killing the hardest boss in a game with no food in a 200 kill streak with 0 deaths, most kills in a streak possible. The fabled 200 kill streak starting at 4000% in rage with no food. Boom! Boom! Over the course of 2 months, I refined and polished my rotations to near perfection to find the most reliable way to do consistent no food kills to the point I can do it 200 times in a row. Let's go over just how these kills are possible and what kind of strategies you need in order to do no food kills at Telos. First, let's start with our gear setup. You'll notice that I use melee instead of the usual magic you may have expected. In the past year and a half, melee and range both got enough power to creep to start to overtake magic in almost every way. While magic remains the most well documented and developed style for Telos, with most people to this day still assuming you use it. In my opinion, there are far better styles to learn nowadays that are safer, mechanically easier, or faster. Melee is the safest style to use with absolutely 0 RNG to every rotation, and has a lot of advantages for no food kills like Scrimshaws of Vampirism, which is a lot stronger than Blood Barrage for magic, and Onyx Bolts for ranged. Range is the most dangerous and hardest to use on the top level, but it has some hilarious budget setups that outperform the other styles for the price, and with best in slot is the fastest way to kill Telos over melee and magic by a good 30 seconds or more. Or in more practical terms, more than 2 extra kills per hour. So with melee, we got the usual suspects like our 292 weapons and such. Co-fetches are basic 292 weapons with nothing special. The Massive Spear of Annihilation increases the duration on the bleed abilities, that being Dismember, Slaughter, and Blood Tendrils. This gets the most use during P2 and P3. Zero's Godsword is normally extremely powerful with a super useful special attack that boosts your damage by 25% for 20 seconds, while doing pretty good bleed damage on your target. Unfortunately, there's no room for this spec anywhere in the fight, so that's unused like 99.9% of the time. For all intents and purposes in this challenge, it's also a vanilla weapon like Kopech's. Scythe is taken for some easy reach on some phases, but it's not really super useful, it's just a nice thing to have. I also start off holding a Dragon Battle Axe, but I only really use it at the Adrenaline Crystal spec right before going inside the fight to get a 20% damage boost for a full minute, which basically means more damage on P1. For the rest of the fight, it basically goes completely unused. The amulets are our big aces in the hole. It's the essence of finality, the best amulet in the game, period, and they are incredibly important for Telos. You can throw special attack weapons inside of them to use that special attack with the current weapons you're using with no other restriction, aside from needing to be on the same style. In this case, we have put in Statius' Warhammer and Dragon Claws inside our amulets. Statius spec is crazy good since it raises the base hit chance, or affinity, of Telos by 5 for a minute. In practical terms, this means over 10% accuracy gained, which puts me at 100% accuracy for the fight, and it's in my best interest to have this up. It also has another effect in draining defense levels by 30%, which means even after that debuff goes away, those drained defense levels mean I can still have 100% accuracy until the next time I next use Statius. Meanwhile, Dragon Claws hit really hard, especially in Berserk, although at the cost of 50% adrenaline, so it's not very adrenaline efficient. This gets more used at a certain point of fight, or if I can afford to blow adrenaline instantly elsewhere. There's a third Essence of Finality we have, but we'll come back to that later. Finally, Essence of Finalities are both an Amulet of Souls and Reaper Necklace combined into one, which means Protection Prayers and Soul Split are buffed massively from Souls, and you get even more accuracy from Reaper, although the accuracy isn't as big as it normally is. For armor, we're using Trim Masterwork. This has a set effect of offsetting damage taken to spread across a few seconds, which scales up the more pieces you equip from a minimum of 3 pieces. So with this, you initially reduce incoming damage by 30%, and then that reduced damage will then hit you for the next few seconds. That's another way melee can be safer since that reduces instant KO potential, then you can recover by using defensive abilities afterwards to save yourself right after or whatever. You still take the same amount of damage as without Trim Masterwork though, so do not think this as damage reduction, this is only damage offset. I also take a normal Masterwork leg switch that also has Clear-Headed 4 on it, for extending my anticipation from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. This is absolutely huge for anti-stun rotations, since there are minions in the fight that can stun you, which is quite unpleasant. It also has Turn on 4, but that's only relevant for defenders, which I'm not currently using, so ignore that in terms of the streak. Next, we have Cinderbane Gloves, which needs little introduction as it makes poison damage way stronger. This is best in slot everywhere you can poison anything, no questions asked, because of its crazy DPS boost compared to any other gloves. In my pocket slot, I have Aerithor's Grimoire, which is insanely strong. It provides a 12% critical hit buff and increases your maximum hit with crits from 12k to 15k. Since melee will normally get hit capped to 12k pretty often, raising that cap is super helpful in that critical hit buff is basically as strong as a superior Scrimshaw of Cruelty or elements for ranged and magic respectively. Speaking of Scrimshaws, I also bring a superior Scrimshaw of Vampirism to sometimes switch between so I can get more life steal, and this comes into play during the more dangerous parts of the fight. Laceration Boots and the 2 shields are up next. There's a really great ability you can get from a minigame called Shattered Worlds, south of the water altar in Lumbridge. This is Bladed Dive. With it, you can instantly move to any tile you want within a 10 square radius if it's not completely blocked off. The only downside is you need to use dual wield melee, and we need to be able to move around with Bladed Dive while wearing a shield across the fight. This is problematic, but this is where lacerations come in. Lacerations make it so you only need to have a main hand melee weapon on, be it one-handed or two-handed, so you can Bladed Dive freely with a shield as you please. As an aside, these are actually inferior to Trim Mass Work boots because you don't really need that Bladed Dive upgrade and the better damage offset is preferred. You use the Defender for normal kills for food, so you don't need lacerations, but that's too risky to use here, so instead we bring shields. In fact, we bring 2 of them, the Divine Spear Shield and Malevolent Kite Shield. Divine is a tier 75 shield that reduces damage taken by 30%. In terms of pure damage reduction as a shield camp, this is the best shield in the game, even better than tier 90 shields like Malevolent. But there are still reasons to use tier 90 shields, because spirit shields also drain a ton of prayer points when they soak damage. As such, they are hard to use without using a ton of prayer restores or penance aura, and most people watching this video will be better off using tier 90 shields or defenders over spirit shields if they want to outright shield camp, since they'll get smited and be panicking over restoring their prayer or something over eating food. Thankfully, nowadays we have a ton of prayer restoring opportunities with spiritual prayers. To go on a related tangent, I'm using a Ripper Demon, and its special attack does a ton of damage, so it's in your best interest to always make sure it's specking by making sure its spec points are topped off. Spiritual prayers are prayer points and summoning potions combined in one, which also restores all spec points. And since you will typically be camping extremely high prayer points as you pump your Ripper full of specs, this effectively changes your focus from your prayer points to your familiar spec points, since prayer points are no longer relevant to keep track of. This synergizes pretty nicely with Spirit Shields, especially if you're no fooding, as all you'll have in your inventory are spiritual prayers, so that massive prayer drain is not very noticeable unless you stop chugging. There's one little thing that changes stuff though. I have Turtling 4 plus mobile on my Divine to barricade on P5 of good mobility, but I also need to barricade on P4 as part of my Telos strategy. The only problem is, while Turtling increases the duration of my barricade so it's very strong on P5, it also increases the cooldown of barricade. With Turtling 4, by the time I need to barricade again on P5, it may be unavailable until like 2 or so seconds later, which by then could mean instant death, and I don't want to consciously slow myself down on P4 because I might forget from going on autopilot. So that's where the Malevolent Kite Shield comes in. I only use this for really one part of the fight on P4 to barricade, with Turtling 2 so barricade itself is long enough to block all damage from this part of the fight, while cooldown is short enough to come back in time on P5. For all intents and purposes, my Divine Spirit Shield is the main shield I use. I use my Malevolent Kite Shield for one other place, but that's the biggest place where it's needed. Finally, we have the miscellaneous things. Vulnerability bombs can be thrown at your target to increase the damage by 10% for 1 minute. Since this could be infinitely refreshed, this effectively means you'll always hit 10% harder. Sticky bombs here are used to bind targets in a 3x3 area from where you aim at. Next up, we have runes for Disruption Shield and Vengeance. Disruption Shield completely blocks one hit when used, which is amazing for Telos to guarantee certain parts of the fight to go smoothly without fear of getting clapped. It is a completely free action, meaning you can just keep doing damage with smart use of it without needing to use a different ability like Resonance or Devotion or whatever. Without Disruption Shield, this challenge would be infinitely more difficult with a lot more RNG and things potentially going wrong. While it has a 60-second cooldown, which for reference is double the length of Resonance, it's still fantastic and a must-have, even for normal kills. Vengeance reflects 75% of the next hit you take back to your target, and since 4000% Telos hits like a truck, this can easily add up for more damage. Finally, we have runes for Entangle, but hold up, we don't have any nature runes and we're camping Lunar with no runes for Public Swap. How's that possible? Well, with Borrowed Power, the final unlock from Livid Farm, you you can actually convert a specific standard spell from a list to a lunar spell that only requires astral runes to use. So we select Entangle, and we can use it 1000 times before we have to recharge it again with 18k living points. These alone make melee even viable to do at higher rates. If it weren't for Sticky Bombs and Entangle, melee would never be used ever above 1000%, and you'll see why when we actually look at the fight. We also take a Power Burst of Vitality, which doubles your current and max health for 6 seconds, then it halves your health after it wears off. In simple terms, it effectively means you take 50% less damage, but your healing is also 50% as effective during the duration. But in a no food scenario like this, that 50% damage reduction in a can is super nice at the right place, and you'll see me use it on P2 and P5 to keep myself alive better. Despite all that, we're not done yet though. There are just a few more things to reveal. The Ranch Out of Time is a farming training place where we can grow animals to harvest for XP and materials, but more importantly, fully grown animals in the farm can give you some really nice buffs. You can only really choose one big buff however, and that big buff comes from Malatops. When you have Malatops in your pens, your barricade duration is increased by a flat 3.6 seconds. I don't need to tell you how good that is. It's an absolute lifesaver every time you use Barricade. It's pretty self-explanatory. For relics, this is kind of unconventional. Instead of using Berserker's Fury, which increases damage to lower your life points, I replace it with Heightened Senses, which increases my maximum adrenaline from 100% to 110%. I won't get that much use out of Berserker's Fury because there's no way I want to camp low life points intentionally, and Heightened Senses is nicer to use anyways. Having more adrenaline available at the start and stored allows for more flexible rotation across every phase, which outweighs the extra damage I would get from Berserker's Fury. Then I have Fear to Small for more adrenaline on basics, and Death Ward so I take less damage when I actually go below half health. Goes without saying. In terms of invention perks, aside from Clear-Headed Force Switch and the shields, it's the usual stuff like Aftershock, Precise, Enhanced Devoted, Impatient, Biting, Relentless Crackling, etc. Very vanilla and straightforward. Now you may have all the gear and equipment, but that doesn't mean anything if you lack the mechanical skill to back it up. Let's start to go over the strategies and methods used. First, let's go over things that are used for nearly every single no food challenge I have and will do unless otherwise specified should I ever deviate from them for another challenge. The first of them is actually something that applies to high-end PvM as a whole, Soul Split Flicking. Basically, you switch between the Soul Split prayer and Protection prayers to get the benefit of both at the same time. This alone cuts down on so much food usage, but for some bosses like Telos, you'll need more than that. That being said, Soul Split Flicking is basically a necessity for any no food challenge and highly recommended to learn for any high-end PvM, although it may take some time to learn. Combined with Vamp Scrim, your sustain can go through the roof, and that can really allow you to no food almost anything with minimal defensive usage. Another thing you could do is something I came up with called Spirit Flicking. You don't have to just use the Spirit Shield as a shield switch for defensives only. Instead, you can switch to your Spirit Shield right as the attack lands to instantly reduce that 30% damage. Considering how lossless that is if you get good with it, it really helps to take much less damage over the course of kill, but it's also very difficult to use properly without losing damage. On that note, this has very little practical use outside no food gimmick kills, and even then this particular skill isn't terribly used for no food kills. I myself haven't even used it until more recently with stuff like Solo Beastmaster, with different stipulations. Range can use this pretty nicely with an Eldritch Crossbow inside SS Finality, letting you use ECB spec while reducing damage in other lossless ways, but aside from that, it's limited and not super useful since most bosses don't really hurt enough to use up all your food. Maybe in new high-end bosses perhaps. Alright, let's get into the main meat of this video, the Telos specific strategies. Get ready because this is a doozy. Let's start with the first one. Staff of Light has a very powerful special attack where you can reduce all melee damage by 50% for a full minute. The only problem is you can't switch out your Staff of Light, else you lose the special effect. Or do you? There is one last thing in the setup I didn't call attention to just yet, and this is what it's for. If you put a Staff of Light in an SS Finality and use it, you can switch anything out and the effect persists. While the Staff of Light spec is far too costly mid-kill, costing 100% adrenaline, the adrenaline crystals at Ward's Retreat make that a non-issue, letting you prepare your Staff of Light spec right before you step into the portal. One thing you may notice in the raw footage is that I turn ability queuing off and on when using it. This is because you cannot cast the Staff of Light spec in an SS Finality without a target if you have ability queuing on. Since I actually do use ability queuing, I typically turn it off and on so I can use it. Starting off in P1, we start with Surge mid-GCD after a random defensive ability, then use Devotion immediately to protect ourselves against the next upcoming auto attacks. Then we use something called Target Cycling to instantly attack Telos. Target Cycling is primarily meant for swapping between targets. and we definitely use that still for switching targets elsewhere. However, the most common way for people to use target cycling is being able to attack enemies earlier than can click on their hitboxes. You can easily see this in action at Hellware, where you're able to attack way earlier than normal. At Telos though, target cycling has quite a few benefits the average viewer may not even know about. Aside from being able to attack faster, there are 2 extra good things that come of it. First off, you can flinch Telos for a bit, which delays when he starts attacking you. Notice the difference between attacking him earlier or later depending on my target cycle or not. Second, target cycling ensures Telos will no longer completely able to hug you, allowing for a later strike to be done. If you don't target cycle, you'll notice that Telos will just always remain in melee distance, or MD for short. Target cycling to make sure he doesn't do this will come up again later in the fight. Anyways, with the target cycle, we start with an instant Thaddeus Warhammer spec, then we do 4 basics to get back to full adrenaline. The goal of this phase is to get past one of Telos' upcoming mechanics like Tendrils, which comes after 7 auto attacks. The spec does massive damage, around 4k damage per tick, drains 5% adrenaline per tick, and even heals Telos a lot too. So we want to completely bypass that. We need to do 30k damage in order to clear it, so a proper setup is required. After we get maximum adrenaline after our Thaddeus Warhammer, we use Berserk and then switch to a shield and use Divert. Divert is a recently released ability from Rakshil that basically works like Resonance, but gains adrenaline instead of health. The maximum adrenaline you can gain is capped by the tier of your shield, so I bring out my Malevolent Kite Shield here for a maximum of whopping 50% adrenaline gained. To maximize my chance of getting hit, I take off my plate body to reduce that RNG there. Then I use Greater Barge that turns my next channel ability like Assault, Destroyer, Flurry into a damage over time ability, letting me do other abilities while the full channel goes off on top of other attacks. Then 2 more basics while Spirit Flicking, and this is where the fun begins. I step out of range, stall Assault for 2 ticks, then click back on Telos to release it and then instantly Hurricane. This does so much damage, the vast majority of the time I will be freed without taking any damage or losing adrenaline. Over 30k damage in the span of a second from 2 Assault hits and Hurricane. How this works is that channel abilities after a barge actually work from afar. What this means is hits 2 and 4 will happen at the same time no matter what. Stall and our assault only changes the timing of the first hit, so we can delay that hit to the perfect time with Tendrils. If the first 3 hits don't instantly free me, the second assault hit will surely seal the deal. That long range property also works with Bleed, Destroy, and Stuns. You'll see that pop up later on P4. After that, we aim to get him down to 450k for the next phase before he does the next special attack, so we do some more basics here. If I don't get him down in time, then I use a backup plan to ensure I get that happen. Right as Telos does his final attack before the next special attack, I'll throw a Sticky Bomb to bind him, which causes one of his key mechanics to trigger, his Freedom mechanic. You may have already seen it when I used Barge, as that's also a bind, but it comes relevant here. Telos has an anti-stun mechanic where, just like you, the player, he can use Freedom to break free of stuns and binds. Catches, however, is that at 1000% and above, he can only do it once every 10 seconds. So he bait his Freedom out with a perfectly timed Sticky Bomb, then we stun him immediately with Backhand, a forceful backhand to do more damage and keep him stunned. After that forceful backhand, another one of Telos' mechanics pops up, beams that spawn across the arena that grant you various buffs. Here, the blue beam, or normally the green beam, gives you 10% adrenaline per tick when standing in it, while also quickly draining your prayer points as a trade-off. We use Thaddeus Warhammer and use Blade Dive to quickly move into the beam, benefit from the adrenaline boost before the next phase starts. Start of P2. I wait 1 tick after regaining control, then use Barge. Winning that 1 tick is actually pretty important because Telos is completely invulnerable for 2 ticks from the start of the phase for some reason, so he can't attack immediately. Barge does damage and pops Telos' Freedom, then I use Bleed Destroy. Next up is something called 5 tick auto attack. You may have heard of 4 ticking with magic, where you basically juggle between dual wield and 2-handed weapons to take advantage of auto attacks mixed in with abilities. This is a far more limited version of that, but still pretty critical for melee Telos specifically. After Bleed Destroy, I switch to my ZGS and wait for the auto attack to come out. Then I immediately use Backhand and Forceful Backhand to get more damage off the auto attack and to maximize the stun lock. After Forceful Backhand, we Blade Dive into a corner and let Telos walk towards us. Right on cue, the black beam spawns, and unlike the blue beam, we really don't want either ourselves or Telos inside the beam. The black beam reduces damage taken by 30%, but also lowers our damage by 30%. One thing I didn't mention back in P1 but is relevant now is that Telos also benefits from any beams touching him. For the blue beam, Telos attacks 1 tick quicker, and for the black beam, Telos now takes 20% less damage. With Soul Split and Spirit Flicking, we reduce enough damage for now to not need the damage reduction from black beam, and we still want to do more damage, so we completely avoid the black beam like the plague. After that forceful backhand, this leads to a pretty strong side effect of Telos' freedom. When he uses freedom, he attacks immediately 2 ticks later, but that freedom takes priority over him attacking, meaning between him attacking or using freedom, he'll use freedom, and that ironically turns his freedom into a mini stun. My stun lock lasts the perfect time between his freedom timers, which causes a super long period of time where Telos can literally do nothing. The rest of P2 is pretty standard. You do a ton of damage with Threshold, Strong Basics, and another Steadiest Warhammer spec and wait for his next spec, which is Hold Still. This spec stuns you and hits you with a huge melee hit, then stomps you at where you are for even higher typeless damage. Both hits can KO you from full health pretty easily, but thankfully we can use that melee hit to our advantage for either Resonance or Divert. So use Anticipation or Freedom prior to Hold Still, then exploit it. Depending on what I need, I can use either Resonance or Divert, then basically max out on either health or Adrenaline. Then we move on to P3. P3 can actually be pretty spooky. Alongside P5, the final phase, this phase is where I actually lose the majority of my streaks, due to a combination of low damage and bad luck with being spawned or messing up my strategy. The problem is that this phase requires some conscious risk in order to not have a bad rest of the phase and P4, so you have to be very careful. Remember how we don't want Telos to be in the blue or black beam? Well, we have to break that rule for a bit. First off, the red beam. This increases your damage dealt and taken by 30%, and when Telos is in it, he does 30% more damage. Second off, P3 has another gimmick to it where the bar underneath his health bar can rise and fall depending on him being a beam or not. It also appeared in P1 and 2, but that's different and is not relevant to this at all. It's also affected by minions that spawn in the phase, but throughout this entire streak, I also ignore those, so you should ignore those as well. Anyways, Telos' bar determines what can randomly happen in the fight. If the bar is pointing to the left, he will drain Adrenaline and Prayer. At 4000%, he can drain everything, even from full, if the bar is completely to the left, so this absolutely destroys our DPS rotations after that. The closer it is to the center, the less the drain is, so it's more manageable. If the bar is to the right, Telos will emit a shockwave that can hit pretty high unless you have defensives up. At 4000%, this can kill you instantly without Barricade or Disruption Shield. Funny enough, between the two options, it's better to get the shockwave, as it's better to give up Disruption Shield than to give up a ton of Adrenaline and Prayer. So the goal here is to rush Telos down as quickly as possible. Start with the Sunlock rotation we did back on P2, Barge after waiting 1 tick after regaining control, Bleed Destroy to 5 tick auto, Backhand, Forceful Backhand. Then I use Blade Dive to go into the beam and then run past it to lure Telos for a bit. Once he's inside for only a little while, that's enough and I camp the beam from then on. If timed right, Telos won't drain his run nor emit a shockwave, and at worst, he only drain a little bit or emit a shockwave that's easily blocked. For the red beam, using Blood Tendrils to slaughter with the Spear of Annihilation contributes to a huge chunk of damage. Then Assault will do even more damage. Generally, this is enough, but it's enough I'll look to save myself a Resonance if my health is low. If my health is high, I'll use Divert instead and then use Dragon Claw spec to do a ton of damage, which should finish the phase off anyways. What makes this phase spooky is messing up Blade Dive into the beam or otherwise messing up the Leer. If this happens, Telos will be pretty far into the right side, which puts the rest of the phase in jeopardy. Thankfully, the upcoming shockwave will put the bar pretty far towards the middle, so it's still recoverable from there. But hold on, if it's so random, how can you block it so easily? Just reflexes? Here's a secret. The drain and shockwave is not random. There's a check that happens on very specific ticks after the phase starts. If you pay attention to when exactly these checks happen, you can plan your entire rotation around these checks. While I haven't timed it myself down to the tick, you can use your rotation as a way to know when the check happens. So with an upcoming shockwave, since I know in this case it's coming, I will delay my assault by 1 ability, block it with Disruption Shield, then continue my rotation like normal. If I end up getting a second shockwave though, that may spell a sign or death, so that's pretty bad. P4 is pretty straightforward. Here, our goal is to make sure Telos has no specs at all because we're going to stun lock him to a whole nother level in this phase. Do the Barge stun lock rotation we did for P2 and P3, then throw another Steadiest Warhammer spec on him to upkeep our accuracy. Then we move to the font nearby, and what's basically the only relevant of this phase pops up. Hostile Golems and the font. Telos starts charging up an insta-kill in the background, and given enough time, he'll kill you with it. While that's happening, Golems spawn and will start to attack you. They come in 3 varieties. Pure Golems hit harder, or well they're supposed to, but they're bugged on P4 to actually hit super low, even at 4000%. They actually hit super hard on P5, but what's up at the time here? Corrupt Golems periodically drain your armor, making you more susceptible to more hits. and volcanics can randomly stun you after they do 2 hits on you, and they are by far the most annoying of the bunch. This is where having a super long anticipation of a clear-headed switch comes into handy. These golems have way too much health to kill them, and our AoE options are bad, so we have to deal with them the entire phase. But the font rears its head here. It's your only option against that insta-kill, but in exchange, it drains your health and does quite a bit of damage. Thankfully, defensive abilities like Resonance, Reflect, and Barricade all work. Once it drains enough times, it creates a protective shield against the insta-kill you just have to stand in. So I put on my Divine, activate my Vamp Screen over my Grimoire, that use defensives to massively reduce damage taken. Once that's done, there's still Telos and the Golem to deal with. This is where Sticky Bombs come into play. They're the key to keeping golems at bay here. We throw them once the font is done charging, then we throw another one right in front of them to catch them again after they break free. At the perfect time, I barge out of the font to pop Telos' freedom, then do the Snarlock rotation again from afar, then build 100% adrenaline. Because I have to cast Destroy from afar, and most times it take a tick or so longer to reach him, I can't always 5 tick, so I have to lose out on that damage. Still though, this does enough damage to force him into the next font without him doing a single auto attack. More golems spawn, and it's time for the next font. Instead of Reflect, this time I use Barricade with my Malevolent Kite Shield I mentioned in the gear setup. Then I throw my Sticky Bombs again, and then get ready to Snarlock Telos again. This time though, I don't barge immediately out of the font. Instead, I do it right as the insta-kill lands. This does mean I have to tank an auto attack, but that's okay. Since he did an auto attack here, the normal Snarlock rotation would be kind of wasted, so I'll do a different non-stun ability between Barge and Bleed Destroy, then 5 tick into Forceful Backhand, and that's enough for Snarlock in here. Next up, I throw another Sticky Bomb at the corner of the hole in the ground, trapping the upcoming golems. With the third font opened up, more golems are coming towards me. But we have another plan for that. Blade Dive over the golems, then use the ingenuity of the humans with Entangle. Sticky Bombs are great, but they last a bit too short and chaining them here will be annoying. So using Entangle here, which lasts for 24 seconds, is the best way forward. Then we go into the font hassle-free, do our defensives, then Snarlock him again. One of the more chill phases when things go right, but if you deviate from the rotations, things can get bad very quickly. This is another place where I lose some streaks, which does suck because unlike P3, there's very little chance of recovery here if I sign. Start at P5, we instantly use Disruption Shield, Pray Melee, and Barge exactly 2 ticks after we gain control. That Disruption Shield is also key for guaranteeing P5s. If a golem spawns and hit me very close to where I end up with Barge, that lines up perfectly with Telos' magic hit, and Disruption Shield always prioritizes Telos' hit over minions. If I'm too early, golems will spawn in very unfavorable places which will end up hurting way more, and if I'm too late then I can't guarantee I'll live against Telos' auto attack. So properly delaying that Barge is super important. Then I use Debilitate with Divine and Blade Dive into the beam or towards back beam if that happens. Also using my Power Burst of Vitality to double my health and even further decrease my KO potential. Then I set up my DPS rotation here with Natural Instinct, Reflect, Statics Warhammer Spec, Immortality for safety, Revenge, Resonance, then Barricade, then put on my Grimoire again, replacing my Vamp Scrim. Barge to Berserk, Dragon Claw Spec, Bleed Assault, then do 3 more Dragon Claws. When I Bleed Assault, I start to throw Sticky Bombs in both directions towards the other beams to cover my bases. After that, I Surge and Blade Dive through Telos to get to the beam that has a virus. This mechanic actually shows up in P2 and P3 as well, but because we skipped that, it doesn't really become relevant until here. Basically, you're inflicted with a dangerous virus that can only be cleared by going to the right colored beam. At 4000%, it can hit around 5k or so rapidly, so you would die very quickly if you had to tank it. But I have to leave the blue beam anyway because my Barricade is about to run out, and I can't afford to tank both the golems and Telos himself without any defensives. After that, I basically just finish him off with some strong thresholds and call it a day. This rotation is so consistent, it works with even Volcanics out there who can randomly start stunning you after they do 2 attacks. With Volcanics, I just fit in 3 of them after Sadius Warhammer, then after Revenge, I surge to the start of the beam away from Telos to get away from Volcanics long enough, then put on my Masterwork Lead Switch for Clear-Headed 4 to Anticipation, then Barricade to do my DPS rotation as normal. But instead of do 3 Dragon Claws after Assault, I only do 2 and leave much earlier. I can't do 3 because then my Anticipation would run out, and I don't want to be stunned before I can leave. And with Back Beam, I just add a basic and Forceful Backhand between Debilitate and Natural Instinct, then do the same rotation from then on, Volcanics or no. Unfortunately, with Back Beam, there comes a problem if I go a bit too fast. Sometimes, golems are left behind and they won't aggro me, meaning when I Blade Dive into the side beams, they'll aggro me right away. I avoid this problem by running back towards the other group of golems, which are all bounded by the Sticky Bomb, then I throw another Sticky Bomb on Telos' corner to cast the upcoming golems. Once they're bound, I stun Telos so I can safely pray melee against a single golem, then start throwing more Sticky Bombs to cover my bases while I finish off Telos. So that's how 1 kill goes. Now you need to do that 199 more times, and there's some more RNG to deal with. So let's rewind and look at all the phases to see where things can go wrong and how to deal with that, alongside some strategy changes that I incorporated across my time trying. P1 is pretty consistent. As stated, my Assault and Hurricane would normally instantly clear tendrils, but there are very rare instances where I don't get freed. If that happens, I simply react quickly from seeing initial weak hits and use Reflect with my shield, then play it safe from there. I would also have Disruption Shield up so I'll block at least 1 tendril hit. I may get Uppercut if I keep doing less damage from here as well, but that's unlikely. Even so, getting that isn't terribly detrimental. Unfortunately, I can't really make any mistakes of anything here, because if I sign right before tendrils, there's nothing I can do about it and I'll lose the streak. But Telos' damage is low enough to where I can at least survive before tendrils. When I first started, I would use Resonance and just use my Adrenaline Renewal, but after some time I switched to Divert so I could potentially save my Adrenaline Renewal for any sketchy part or just be able to do P4 more easily, because with Adrenaline Potting on P1, it won't be up for P4 unless I deliberately slow myself down on P2 or P3, which is a bit inconvenient. In normal and old no food kills, I would bait out magic auto attacks because for some reason those hit way less than melee hits. But that is kind of risky and it was easier to mess up. Staff of Light and an SF Finality made that unnecessary, so I don't need to bait magic autos anymore, just tank melee hits. So that's good. P2 is by far the most consistent phase. There's basically no RNG here beyond just doing more damage, of which doesn't matter because I'll consistently phase after hold still anyways, sometimes before. Out of all the phases, this is the one we can expect to go perfectly. I haven't needed to change much of anything in this phase beyond what I was doing already. Sometimes I would divert an auto attack before hold still and then use Devotion perfectly to block the rest of his auto attacks and hold still itself. But that's a bit case by case and not really important anyways. P3 is a minefield. There are numerous different spawns for beams that have to alter some lures based on that. Sometimes the beam spawns directly at Telos, so after I blade dive into the beam, I just let Telos soak up one more tick of the beam before camping it for the rest of the phase. There are some beam spawns that end up too far from melee distance and I don't want to use my scythe, so I have to go out far with my blade dive, lure Telos into the beam, then run into the beam after he soaks up the beam for a bit. Sometimes I get hit really hard, so I use Resonance to try get a quick heal. Definitely a spooky phase, but at least most of the time it goes swimmingly well. Unfortunately, again, this is one phase where I couldn't afford to change any strategies without any huge caveats to it. If I just camped the red beam without letting Telos touch the beam, I would lose so much adrenaline, my P4 would be a bit bad, and if I needed Adrenaline on P1, that would be even less fun. ZGS P3 also similarly destroys adrenaline a ton, and threshold bleeds were generally good enough anyways. So again, there's nothing to gain aside from just doing the current strategy through the entire time. That meant I lost a lot of streaks here, but it is what it is. P4 has little RNG. Even if I don't manage to perfectly stun lock Telos, he gets an auto attack in or not here and there, that doesn't matter because I can easily tank it, then recover the rest of my health thanks to Vamp Scrim and Soul Split basically undoing any damage taken. But this phase still is quite precise. If you mess up using defensives or you barge at the wrong times, then you're punished with either a sign or a death. Another place I made some mistakes was missing an entangle. If I miss entangle, then I'm forced to repeat the font 1 and 2 strategy where I sticky bomb golems, but at this point, it's a lot more dangerous. Devotion is really good for covering up damage against golems, and I have to be much more precise with sticky bombs to get away from this huge stack of golems. One more detail I didn't bring up but is relevant is that before I blade dive over those 3 golems, I needed to use a defensive after I built up adrenaline by stalling melee abilities out of range. If I didn't, then when I try to entangle, I won't actually entangle. I'll release the last melee hit I've used, completely waste my entangle. Blade dive actually keeps your last ability you stall, which is used in other boss encounters, namely speeds, to transfer abilities stalled on one target to release on another. But here at Telos, that's a liability, so you want to clear that. The only one big change with pure melee was font 2. Remember how I would barge out of font 1 and 3 and then run back into the font? I used to do the same for font 2 to get no auto attacks right after the insta-kill, only instead of running back I would blade dive back into it. But I stopped doing that because it felt a lot easier to just barge out of the font at the same time as the insta-kill landing. And it also made setting up the sticky bomb strategies around the corner a bit easier time, so this is what I ended up with. Plus, it's a bit less spooky in the first place. But you may have noticed me say pure melee just now. I initially tried doing P4 with a magic switch just for that phase. This is probably the most drastic change from what I initially tried in practice. What I would do is start with a stun lock using melee, then as font started, I would swap to magic for the rest of them until the beginning of P5. The big problem was my DPS was far too weak, and using spellbook swap to go from Ancients to Lunars was not fun. Overall, I found a lot more success just melee camping and dealing with that, so magic went into the bin pretty quickly. P5 may seem like a lot of RNG. This definitely has the most RNG of any phase. However, most of the RNG can be simplified and tackled in the same way. For example, every single virus is dealt in the same way. Surge plus blade dive into the beam and cover up my bases with sticky bombs. Pure golems and corrupt golems are dealt the same way. Left and right beams are the same. Realistically, the only thing that's changed the rotation are getting back beams and or volcanics, and I've already gone over the rotation changes needed earlier. But there are some other bits of RNG that could have happened but are covered in my rotation. Sometimes, rocks fall into the beam my blade dive to, or they just come in a completely unfavorable way. That's why I have immortality up until I go hard in DPS, just to cover myself until I feel safest to finish off Telos. Aside from that, I didn't really change much about P5. One thing to keep in mind is that you need to make sure you don't go too far, otherwise golems can loop around and surround you. If this happens, just throw another sticky bomb to intercept them, then either finish Telos off or blade dive over the initial group of golems you have caught, and then keep going from there. It can be frantic to deal with, so you should make sure you don't end up in that situation in the first place. Finally, you may have noticed that sometimes I don't go immediately towards the drop-off point when I go into the next phase. This is deliberate because of two reasons. 1. Sometimes ability cooldowns won't be available on time if I go immediately. This would be a problem if I need to do a stunlock rotation at the start of the next phase and don't have abilities like Destroy available, so taking longer to run to the drop-off point will allow my cooldowns to come back fun enough. Secondly, to make that stunlock rotation work, I need to make sure Telos' Freedom is back on time for it, which is every 10 seconds as a reminder. If Telos freedoms while I'm running to the drop-off point, that desyncs the right time for freedom and my barge won't properly pop it, meaning everything else will be thrown out of whack. So taking that minor time loss of above 10 or so seconds in order to ensure guaranteed rotations to work is the best way forward. But that does it all for the insane amounts of strategies, backup strategies, and setups. This was such a long grind, I was so relieved to get done. I started doing practice right after I got my solo Beastmaster kill with no food and no armor on January 13th, refining my strategies, then after a week of practice, feeling good about stuff, I decided to start doing attempts for real. I actually managed to hit 50 plus kill streak on one of the earliest attempts, which is a really good proof of concept to tell people that this entire thing was possible. But this challenge I kept fighting back, and over the course of 2 months, it would keep fighting back. I'll get some small victories like getting a 100 kill streak, and then later a 150 plus kill streak, but that 200 kill streak has evaded me until it was finally mine. As always with 200 kill streaks, you make a ton of money, but just how much do you make? In total, I made around 1.3 bill in commons alone, and I've gotten several rares. 6 orbs and 1 dormant stick of Staff Sliske. My mistake. Assuming orbs are worth around 233 mil per, and dormant Staff Sliske is 50 mil, that's roughly 2.7 bill made in cash. Since this streak takes around 18 hours and 10 minutes to do at 11 kills per hour, that's around 151 mil per hour. That sounds like a lot, but unfortunately this is actually pretty bad for a 200 kill streak. Across the full list of people who have done one, the average is 8.9 rares per streak. I fell short of that, and even my past 3 200 kill streaks were far better. My first 3 200 kill streaks were all worth 3.3 bill, and the one I did before this one made 4.4 bill, and except the first 200 kill streak, which was probably at the same speed as this one, they were all done in less than 16 hours. 14 hours in fact in terms of the 4.4 bill streak. And that doesn't even count all the rares I lost. Due to how Telos streaking and its drops work, dying on streaks severely cuts your profit. How it works is you keep 5% of your loot multiplied by the amount of kills you've done up to a cap of 15. So if you've done 10 kills in a streak, you'll keep 50%. If you did 15 or more, you'll keep 75%. But here's the kicker, it all rounds down. So say if I died on this streak, because I only had 1 dormant Staff of Sliske, I would keep 0.75% of it, which rounds down to 0. If I had 2, then I would keep 1.5 staffs, which would round down to 1. That goes with the other commons as well, so while in terms of commons you'll lose a bit over 25% of them, for rares they are at greater risk and I've lost a ton of rares. Special thanks to a Twitch viewer in my streams, Kemp7, for going through as many past streams as possible and logging almost all the times I lost or kept rares. And this is the result with over 100 drops seen and 75 drops lost with 25 in total claimed. Assuming each orb set is 700 mil, Dormant Serengabo is 900 mil, Staff of Sliske is 50 mil, Zero's Godsword is 300 mil, and Reprisal Codice is 40 mil. I have lost 19.2 bill in rares alone, not even counting commons. This may be slightly inaccurate, but the amount of commons I also lost should make up for any difference. So I had a huge opportunity loss going for this challenge compared to either doing normal 200 kill streaks or doing 24-49% claims instead. But that's basically all there is to the kill streak. I didn't want to just upload the raw streaks to YouTube this time, although you can find them on my Twitch page and I will put a link to them in the description. I felt the streak required a full deep dive on what needed to be done in order to be so consistent. And chances are, I may have still missed one thing I forgot to elaborate on or something. But combat in RuneScape is so complex and multi-layered that there's always something new to learn. And I hope you managed to learn some neat stuff about Telos strategies and how melee works here. It was still not quite done with Telos just yet, even though this was a holy grail of Telos challenges. What will they be? Just wait and see. That does it for this video, however. If you enjoyed this video, it would be incredibly appreciated if you share it with other people and hit that like or even subscribe button. There's going to be even more PvM content to hit the channel and it will be incredibly exciting. Until next time everybody, bye.